I was in the woods above Ogden because our volunteer tracking group needed someone to swap 2 trail camera cards before a storm, and I said yes because I wanted one quiet night away from work. The plan was simple: hike 3 miles up an old logging road, change the cards, sleep near the creek, and walk out early before rain turned everything into mud. The site was a flat patch beside a dead fire ring, boxed in by pines. I set my tent, ate tuna from a pouch, checked my map, and watched my phone drop from 1 bar to nothing. By 11, I still could not sleep, so I put in my earbuds, played music too loud, grabbed my headlamp, and walked the logging road to burn off the restless feeling. The road dipped below camp and curved around old cut logs, and that was where I saw her. She stood about 20 feet ahead, facing away from me. Young woman, maybe college age, tank top, short jean shorts, no socks, no shoes. The barefoot part hit first because the road was sharp gravel, pine cones, and broken sticks, and she stood on it like it was carpet. She swayed from foot to foot and kept yanking the back of her shorts up with both hands, hard and angry, like the fabric was fighting her. There was no flashlight, no tent glow, no friends, no car engine. Just her standing there in the dark, pulling at her clothes like she was stuck inside a bad dream. I stopped walking, and for a second I let the music keep playing because my brain refused to accept what I was seeing. My first thought was drugs, then that somebody else had to be nearby, because none of this made sense. I looked past her for a campsite, but the road behind her just vanished between trees. I did not want to walk closer, and I did not want to leave her there. You see a person who might need help, and your fear has to fight your guilt before your legs get permission. I pulled 1 earbud out, killed the music, and took 1 slow step backward. She did not turn around. I took another step and decided I would get back to camp, grab my bear spray, climb the ridge where service sometimes came in, and call county dispatch. She stayed still, swaying lightly, still tugging at those shorts. Then I heard breathing behind me. Not footsteps, not gravel, just breathing. Fast, wet, and close enough that I felt it before I understood it. I spun around so hard my headlamp beam jumped into the trees, and she was right there, less than 2 feet from my face. Somehow she had cleared the distance without making a sound. Her mouth hung open, her eyes were wide, and she was whispering something like she had been running words through her teeth. I threw my hands up, palms out, and said something like Jesus Christ because nothing smarter reached my mouth. I glanced down without meaning to, because I still could not understand how she had moved so quietly. Her bare feet were dirty and cut, and 1 heel had a dark smear under the lamp. That glance set her off. She looked down at her own feet, then snapped her head back up at me. Her face twisted like I had done something disgusting. She said, "You saw my feet," and then called me a fucking pussy so loud it cracked through the trees. It was not normal drunk yelling. It came out sharp and personal, like she had been waiting for me to look down. I told her to stay back, but my voice came out thin. She smiled at that, lifted 1 foot off the gravel, and flexed her toes in the light like she wanted me to look again. Then she stepped forward, and I stepped back while she breathed through her mouth and whispered broken words about shoes, cowards, and people staring. I started backing toward camp. She followed without stumbling, placing each bare foot fast and flat, somehow quieter than my boots. That scared me more than the yelling. I turned and walked faster because backing up in the dark felt like a good way to crack my skull. She shouted behind me right away, mostly nonsense, but every few seconds the word feet came through clear. Then she screamed, 1 raw burst with no words inside it, and my body made the decision for me. I ran. I hit camp too fast and nearly tripped over the fire ring. My tent looked useless, just thin nylon and poles. I grabbed the bear spray from my pack, ripped the safety clip off, and backed against the biggest tree near the site. She stopped at the edge of camp, barefoot in the pine needles, smiling like I had invited her there. I told her I had spray and she needed to leave. She looked at the can, then looked past me at my tent. My boots were beside the flap because I had changed into camp shoes earlier. She walked straight to them, picked one up by the heel, and held it against her stomach. I told her to drop it. She hugged the boot tighter and whispered about people hiding their feet. She threw the boot past me into the dark, and when I turned my head for half a second, she rushed me. I sprayed blind as soon as she moved. The cloud hit between us and blew back into my own eyes, but she caught most of it. She screamed before she even fully stopped. It was coughing, laughing, and rage mashed together. She dropped to one knee, clawing at her face, and I ran uphill behind camp. I climbed until my lungs burned, killed my headlamp, and crouched behind a rock outcrop. Down below, she tore through my camp. Fabric ripped, a bullet snipped. Something metal clanged against stone. My phone still had no service. The noise stopped after a while, and that was worse because every tree became a place she could be standing. I stayed crouched there for hours, knees shaking, one hand over my mouth because my breathing sounded too loud. Just before dawn, my trail camera flashed down by the road. The little red sensor blinked once, then again like something had passed close. I stayed frozen until the woods turned gray enough to show the ground. When I finally crept back down, my tent was collapsed and slashed open. Food was dumped everywhere. One boot sat in the fire ring stuffed with pine needles. The other one was gone. I packed what I could and hiked out wearing one boot and one camp shoe, jumping at every squirrel and branch behind me. At the ridge, I got service and called the sheriff's office. 2 deputies met me near the road and walked back in far enough to see the site. They found bare footprints in the dirt and a smear of blood on a broken branch near the bend. They did not find her. The trail camera gave me the only proof I had. It caught 3 photos around 12:18. The first showed the empty road. The second showed a pale blur low in the frame. The third showed her standing close to the camera, holding my missing boot against her chest. Her face was blown out by infrared, but her mouth was open and her bare feet were black with dirt. The camera also recorded 10 seconds of audio. Most of it was static and insects. Then her voice came through close to the microphone, whispering the same thing 3 times. I could not make out the first 2, but the last one sounded like he looked down. Maybe she was high. Maybe she had a mental break and wandered miles from some house or campsite. Maybe somebody found her later and I never heard about it. I hope that is true because the other version sits in my head like a hook. A barefoot woman was alone in those woods at midnight, moving over gravel without sound. And the only reason I knew she was behind me was because she wanted me to hear her breathing. I was 32, a wife, a mom, and for Mother's Day, I wanted one thing that did not involve diapers, dishes, or pretending I enjoyed a crowded breakfast place. I live in rural Oregon, close to farmland and logging roads, and my plan was simple. Park on my friend's property, cut through her back gate on a BLM land, hike to the river, climb the ridge trail, eat near the Lookout Rocks, and get home before dinner. I had not hiked alone since before pregnancy, and I needed those hours badly, even without my dog, who had died when my son was still a baby. That land was familiar enough to make me careless. My friend and I had ridden horses through it for years, and I knew the fire roads, the crossing, and the ridge trail. Still, service dies fast there, and one old logging road can look exactly like another. I had water, food, my phone, a small first aid kit, and my pistol concealed at my hip. The hike felt normal at first. I crossed the river on flat stones and started climbing through firs and wet brush. My legs burned sooner than they used to, which pissed me off, but it felt good to move without carrying a baby or answering anyone. Halfway along the ridge, I heard men talking ahead. I was annoyed before I was scared, because I had come out there for silence. Then I rounded a bend and saw 3 men standing on the trail, all around my age, none dressed like they were doing a real hike. One had clean sneakers, one had a flat backpack, and the third kept peeling bark off a stick. I gave the usual trail warning and tried to pass. One moved aside, but another touched my elbow as I went by. He put his hand under my arm like he had the right to stop me, and my whole body went cold. He started talking about where I was headed and how nice the day was, all that friendly garbage people use when they want to hold you in place. I answered without giving him anything useful and kept walking, so it was obvious I was leaving. They followed close enough that I heard their steps match mine. Every time I tried to end it, one of them asked another question. Did I live nearby? Did I hike alone often? Did anyone know where I was? I said my husband knew my route and expected me back soon. One of them smiled and said there was no service out there anyway. He said it too quickly, like he had been waiting to use it. That was the moment the whole thing stopped feeling awkward and started feeling planned. I asked where they were going just to see what lie came out. They glanced at each other, then one said they were heading to the waterfall. That was bullshit. The waterfall was nowhere near that ridge, and this trail did not lead there unless you cut through timber and deadfall. I said the waterfall was back the other way, and the man with the stick laughed like I was the one who did not know the land. A few minutes later, the trail climbed a steep bank where you have to grab a root and pull yourself up. They reached it first and stopped in front of me. One said I should come with them instead, that the waterfall was better than the lookout. I said no, flat and clear. They still did not move. Nobody threatened me outright, and somehow that made it worse. I lifted my shirt like I was wiping sweat from my glasses, just high enough for the grip of my pistol to show. The man with the stick saw it first. His face changed, like he was recalculating. Nobody spoke for a couple of seconds, and I used that gap. I climbed the bank fast, slipped once, and hauled myself up before any of them moved. As soon as I got over the top, I ran. I did not look back. I did not listen for proof. I just ran with my pack slamming against my back and branches scraping my arms. After a short stretch, I saw a deer trail cutting into the brush and took it. Staying on the main trail felt like leaving myself open. I pushed through sideways and kept going downhill, because downhill usually means creek, road, valley, something. My hand shook so hard, I kept touching my hip to make sure the gun was still there. The deer trail faded into brambles, then into nothing. Eventually, I found another narrow trail and followed it, convincing myself it had to connect to a road. It did not. It ended in deadfall and ferns. That was when I understood I was alone. Not alone in the peaceful way I wanted that morning, but alone in the dangerous way where no one can hear you and your phone is just a dead square in your pocket. I walked back and forth, trying to find where I'd come down, but every gap in the brush became a wall after 10 steps. I thought about firing one shot, then pictured those men hearing exactly where I was. I sat on a log and tried to eat because panic gets worse when your body crashes. I had packed a tuna sandwich, which is a ridiculous thing to open while lost in the woods. I took 2 bites and started crying with food still in my mouth. I kept thinking about my son at home, while 3 strangers somewhere behind me knew I had no service. That was when the dogs came up the trail. 2 huge Great Pyrenees, white but muddy around the legs, walking calmly like they belonged there. I froze because strange dogs in the woods can be another problem. They did not bark or rush me. One stopped a few feet away and watched me, while the other sniffed my pack and sat beside my boot like he had decided I was his responsibility. I gave them pieces of bread and tuna because I did not know what else to do. They took it gently and stayed with me while I pulled myself together. I know how this sounds, but those dogs changed the entire feeling of the woods. I was still lost, scared, scratched up, and shaking, but I was not completely alone anymore. After a while, both dogs stood up at the same time. One walked off the little trail into the trees, then stopped and looked back at me. The other waited. They moved anyway, and I followed because sitting there was not a plan. They cut through firs, crossed loose rock, dropped into a low valley, and followed deer paths that barely existed. At one point, something cracked high above us on the ridge, and both dogs stopped so sharply I almost walked into them. They stared uphill for a long time. Then the bigger one gave one low bark that made my stomach turn. I never saw the men again, but those dogs reacted like something was up there. The valley finally opened onto an old logging road I did not recognize. The dogs turned left, so I turned left too. We walked until my legs felt hollow, and then the road bent around a cut bank, and I saw a rusted gate I knew from horseback rides. From there, I knew how to reach my friend's place. The dog stayed with me all the way to the barn. My phone found one weak bar near the porch, and I called my husband with hands so shaky I nearly dropped it. We called the non-emergency line later and reported the men, but I could only give scattered details. The dogs ran off before my husband arrived, and I still hate myself for not getting a picture. I still hike, but I do not hike alone there anymore. The woods were not the thing that scared me most that day. The scariest part was realizing 3 strangers knew I was alone before I was willing to admit it to myself. So, if anybody has a pair of guardian dogs that often go missing from your property, just know that they might be helping somebody in need. This happened when I was working a forest survey job because I needed money, hated people after my divorce, and thought a week alone in the woods sounded better than my sister's couch. My role was basic field work: hike logging trails, check cameras, mark broken signs, and sleep at a primitive camp past the locked gate. The plan was to stay Monday to Friday, radio the office before dark, keep my dog with me, and finish without drama. My tent sat near an old creek bed with a bare box, a folding table, a hand pump, and one rotten picnic bench. The first days were normal enough, just wet socks, sore knees, and silence that made every sound feel closer than it was. I heard sticks snap at night, heard whispery sounds near the water, and heard the pump squeak once when nobody stood near it. I blamed animals because animals let you keep working, but my dog noticed more than I did. That changed when my teenage nephew came out one afternoon to help carry batteries. We ate cheap birthday cake at the picnic bench because I had missed his actual birthday, and the flat metal cake server was sitting between us. He stood to toss his plate, and that server shot off the table and slapped his forearm hard enough to leave a mark. It did not slide, it did not get bumped, and there was no wind under those trees. My dog planted himself between us and the creek trail, teeth showing, body low, making a sound I'd only heard when a stray dog came at us. I drove my nephew back through the gate before sunset, and he barely talked on the ride out. When I returned alone, the cake server was under the table, bent almost in half. 2 nights later, I saw the black thing run down a tree. I stepped outside the tent before bed, with my headlamp on and my dog next to my leg. Something small and black dropped from a branch above me and ran straight down the pine trunk, flat against the bark, like a shadow had grown legs. It hit the roots and vanished into the brush without cracking one leaf. My dog froze so hard his collar pressed into my fingers. That was when I started looking up cleansing herbs whenever I got service near the ridge. I ordered sage, juniper, a brass bell, and a couple bundles people online swore by. The package came to the field office 2 days later, and inside the box was a little pendulum board I had not ordered. I almost threw it away because I do not mess with spirit boards, but I still took it back because I wanted answers more than I want to look sane. I read instructions in my truck, and half the pages said pendulums were harmless while the other half said never use one after dark. I waited until morning, set the board on the folding table, and asked yes and no questions with cold coffee beside me. The pendulum swung yes when I asked if something was at camp. It swung yes again when I asked if something had thrown the cake server. When I asked if it wanted to hurt us, it stopped like somebody had pinched the chain. I asked if there was a ghost near me, and the answer came yes. I asked if there was more than one bad thing near me, and the answer came yes again. I asked if those things were human, and the pendulum swung no so hard it clicked against the board. The answer said there was one ghost near the creek and two darker things in the woods, and the ghost was keeping them from coming closer. I burned sage and juniper around camp until everything smelled like smoke and wet dirt. I rang the bell at the pump, the bear box, the tent, the table, and the first stretch of the creek trail. Wild sage grew above camp, so I cut a branch and swung it like a switch while I walked the boundary, telling anything that meant harm to get the fuck away from me. I felt stupid doing it, but the camp felt lighter afterward. The ghost did not leave, though. I kept using the board only in the morning, and for almost 2 weeks the answers came broken and frustrating. Letters jumped around. Yes and no fought each other, and sometimes the pendulum just shook like my hand was not holding it. I searched old local cases in town and found a woman had been killed near that creek years before. Her case went cold after one man was questioned, and her family had spent years begging for tips. The next morning, I asked if she was the ghost near the creek. The pendulum swung yes before I finished the question. I asked if she followed me to camp, and it said no. I asked if she was trapped near the place where they found her, and it said yes. I asked if she was keeping those two things away from my tent, and the chain pulled toward yes so hard my fingers slipped. Right after that, something hit the tent with a creek stone big enough to dent my cooking pan. After I learned her name, the bad stuff stopped acting random. My radio battery drained from full to dead while I was 10 minutes from camp. Orange trail tape I had tied to mark the path got moved deeper into the woods, one strip at a time. The hand pump squeaked after midnight and dumped water into the dirt, like somebody invisible was drinking there. The worst night happened after I came back late from checking a missing trail camera. I knew I should not be out after dark, but my supervisor was on my ass about lost equipment. When I reached camp, my dog refused to leave the truck. The tent flap was open, the lantern was on, and the pendulum board sat on the table even though I had locked it in the bear box. The chain was moving in slow circles by itself. I stood at the tent entrance with my flashlight shaking, and from down by the creek, I heard a woman crying like she was trying not to be heard. That sound made every brave thought leave my body, because it was not monster noise, it was human pain sitting in the dark. My dog snarled from inside the truck, and deeper in the trees, something answered with a low laugh that sounded copied from a person, but not owned by one. I did not touch the board, but I asked if she wanted me to contact someone. The chain stopped circling and swung yes. I asked if she meant her family, and it swung yes again. Then the lantern went out, the creek went quiet, and something moved through the brush behind me with heavy steps that matched mine when I backed toward the truck. I slept in the driver's seat with my dog pressed against the door and a hatchet across my lap. I am at work now and will not get out until almost 11 or midnight, and most of my gear is still sitting at that camp. I do not know how the hell to contact her family without sounding insane, and I do not know whether I am supposed to hand them the board or ask the questions for them. In the morning, I can get proof of the pendulum, the written questions, the article, and maybe the camera audio from the pump if the file did not corrupt. I am not using that thing after dark because everything I read says that invites the wrong spirits, and I think the wrong ones are already waiting near my tent. I need advice on what I should do. Me and my partner took the job because the flat came with the pub, and free rent sounded better than common sense at the time. The place sat alone off a narrow road in England, surrounded by woods on 3 sides, with one muddy car park and no neighbors close enough to hear anything after closing. Our plan was simple: run the bar, change barrels, sleep upstairs, save money, and leave before the building became our whole life. The pub was built in the 1700s, back when coaches cut through those woods and stopped there for horses. Before it was a pub, it had been stables, and you could still feel that in the upstairs beams, the stone cellar, and the back door facing the trees. Customers loved that history when the lights were on. After midnight, when the lane went black, the place felt like it belonged to the woods again. I did not believe the stories at first, because pub people talk nonsense after a few pints. They said an old couple sometimes sat at the bar after last orders, and they said Hoves moved outside when the car park was empty. The worst stories were about the upstairs function room, where locals claimed people had been hanged from the beams. There was also a story about a little girl found hanging up there years before anyone could prove it. Years before us, a medium had been brought in because staff kept refusing to close alone. She said the function room had things passing through it constantly, not one ghost, but crowds. Then she went into the cellar and refused to go down again. She said something down there knew people came in and it wanted them out. The cellar was the first place that made me stop acting brave. You had to go down there to change barrels, but the second you stepped onto those stone stairs, your body wanted to turn around. Staff came up rubbing their necks, saying someone had tugged their shirt or pulled their hair near the kegs. One girl stormed upstairs thinking another worker had followed her down, then went pale when she realized the cellar door had never opened. The first thing I saw happened in the beer garden while I was sorting the planters. My partner was outside with another staff member, and two friends had come by to help move benches. I looked up at the function room window and saw a man watching me from behind the curtain. He stood back in the room, still and calm, looking down like we were the ones trespassing. I shouted because I thought some customer had sneaked upstairs. My partner and the staff member ran inside and went straight to the function room. The room was empty, with no open window, no back exit, and nowhere for a grown man to hide. The curtain had been pulled aside at the exact window where I saw the face. The camera showed nobody entering, nobody leaving, and only that curtain shifting in an empty room. After that, closing became harder. The pub could be warm and loud at 10, then feel abandoned by midnight. We locked the front, counted the till, turned off the pumps, and every wooden crack sounded like a step. Sometimes we heard hooves on the lane, but when my partner checked, there was nothing except wet gravel and dripping trees. Then the alarm started going off around 3 in the morning. We woke above the bar with the siren cutting through the floorboards and the dogs already growling at the hallway. The panel usually showed movement in the function room or cellar, and 9 times out of 10, it was the cellar. More than once, my partner found the beer lines disconnected, even though anyone who has worked with barrels knows those couplers do not just fall off. We had alarm engineers out because we wanted the boring answer. They checked everything, then said the system was working normally. That made everything worse because it meant something was moving in locked rooms while the cameras showed nobody coming or going. Around the same time, the flat started acting like it was not ours. Every few nights, always near 3, we heard little feet running from the spare room toward our bedroom door. Sometimes there was a soft laugh, clear enough to make my skin tighten before my brain could excuse it. Other times there was whispering close to the door, quick and low, like someone wanted us awake but not understanding. The animals reacted before we did, and that is why I stopped blaming stress. Our cats puffed up and stared down the hallway with their backs arched. The dogs lowered their heads and growled into the dark, straight at the empty space outside our room. One night, my bigger dog backed himself against the bed, shaking while he growled, and I felt something waiting on the other side of the door. The spare room bothered everyone because it shared a wall with the function room. My mother refuses to stay long because she gets headaches upstairs and says someone is always standing just out of sight. A colleague slept in that room with the door shut for a few months. One morning, she woke with long scratches down her back, and none of the animals had been inside. For the last year, things eased off enough that we lied to ourselves. The alarm stopped screaming at 3. The beer line stayed connected, and the footsteps became rare enough that I could blame old floorboards. I am pregnant now, and I wanted peace so badly that I stopped talking about the building unless someone else brought it up first. Last night, that peace ended while my partner was downstairs cashing up. I was upstairs with the dogs, sitting on the bed because my back hurt and rain was blurring the woods outside the windows. The pub was locked, the lane was empty, and the whole building had that closed-up silence you only hear miles from anyone. Then 2 female coughs came from inside the flat, close behind the hallway corner. Both dogs snapped their heads toward it at the same time. One started growling before I even stood up. I called my partner and told him to get upstairs, and while the phone was still in my hand, something began thumping inside the spare room. It moved across the wall in a slow pattern, like someone walking beside the wall and hitting it every few steps. The second my partner's feet hit the stairs, the thumping stopped. We stood in the hallway with the dogs behind us, and the spare room door gave one small tap from the inside. My partner reached for the handle, and I told him not to open it, but we did, because fear makes you need proof even when proof is the last thing you want. The room was empty, but the air was freezing. The wardrobe stood open, though I knew I had shut it earlier, and the room smelled like wet leather and old straw. Downstairs, the cellar door was open too, even though my partner swore he had shut it after stock count. We stood at the top of the cellar steps and heard something drag across the stone floor below us. I can explain one alarm, one scratch, one moved curtain, one scared dog, one face in a window if I force myself hard enough. I cannot explain years of locked rooms being triggered, beer lines being pulled loose, animals growling at empty halls, staff being touched in the cellar, and something coughing behind me when I was alone above a locked pub in the woods. I do not want my baby brought into that flat, and I do not care anymore whether we need a medium, a priest, or a moving van. Whatever lives in that old stable pub had gone quiet for a while, but now it knows I am pregnant, and it has started knocking again.